His blood, his kin, waste away, starving in the dark. And above them, the man who ordered it all, Emperor Henry VI, sits unmoved on his throne, listening to the silence that follows their final cries. History has long remembered him as the monster who condemned his family to die in hunger. History remembers him as a monster, an emperor so ruthless, he ordered his own family locked away to be starved to death, all to secure his place on the throne. It's one of the most horrifying acts of family betrayal you'll ever hear, a story whispered down through the centuries as the ultimate proof of his cruelty. The image is chilling, a powerful ruler, callously listening to the fading cries of his own kin, his heart as cold as the stone walls of their prison. This is the legend of Emperor Henry VI, a man defined by this singular, monstrous act. But what if I told you that this story, the one that has branded him a monster for almost 1,000 years, is a carefully constructed lie? That the truth is a twisted tale of political propaganda, historical confusion, and a shocking case of mistaken identity. Today, we're going to unravel the myth of the emperor who supposedly starved his own family and find out what really happened. We'll separate fact from fiction and uncover a story far more complex and, in its own way, far more tragic than the legend we think we know. To understand why this myth was so believable, you have to understand the man at its center, or at least the man he was said to be. Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, who reigned in the late 12th century, was no saint. Later storytellers, particularly in Italy, would give him a fitting nickname, El Cruel, the Cruel. And in many ways, he earned that reputation. As the son of the legendary Frederick Barbarossa, Henry was determined to surpass his father's formidable legacy. He was a man of immense ambition, a sharp politician, and a skilled military leader who ruled a vast and turbulent empire stretching from Germany to Italy. His main goal was to unite the Holy Roman Empire with the wealthy Kingdom of Sicily, which he claimed through his wife, Constance. But the Sicilian nobles and the Pope were dead set against being ruled by a German emperor, and their resistance was fierce. This is where Henry's reputation was forged. He saw conspiracies everywhere, and his response was always swift and brutal. Henry was not a man who tolerated dissent. Rebels were hanged, burned, or drowned. One gruesome and possibly exaggerated story even claims he had a crown nailed to the head of a lead conspirator. His ruthlessness wasn't just for rebels. He famously captured King Richard the Lionheart of England on his way home from the Third Crusade and held him for a staggering ransom, an act that sent shockwaves across Europe. This was a ruler who played the game of power with a hardened, merciless approach, building an aura of authority on a foundation of fear. It's this image, the cold, calculating emperor who would nail a crown to a rival's head, that makes the story of him starving his own family feel so plausible. It just fits the character, right? It feels like the logical, horrifying next step for a man known as the Cruel. The myth suggests that in his thirst for power, no line was too sacred to cross. If he could hold a king for ransom and execute his enemies so brutally, then surely starving his own relatives to eliminate rivals wasn't beyond him. This is the portrait of the monster. It's a powerful image, but it's built on a foundation of sand. Every good historical investigation starts with one simple question: where's the proof? With a story this shocking, you'd expect to find it everywhere. You'd look for it in the chronicles of the time, in letters, in papal condemnations, or in the writings of his many enemies who would have loved to document such a monstrous act. And this is where the whole legend just completely falls apart. When you scour the historical records from his reign, the official documents, the contemporary accounts, all of it, you find nothing. There is not a single credible, first-hand source that accuses Emperor Henry VI of starving his family. Not one. Think about that for a second. This guy had powerful enemies. The papacy, the Italian city-states, the Sicilian nobles, they all had reasons to hate him and use propaganda against him. They gleefully wrote about his real cruelties, like his harsh suppression of rebellions. They complained endlessly about him capturing Richard the Lionheart. If Henry had actually starved his own relatives, it would have been the ultimate propaganda weapon. It would have been shouted from every pulpit and written in every chronicle hostile to him. It would have been the headline of his reign. Instead, there's only silence. The detailed records of his life mention plenty of political maneuvering and war, but this specific accusation is just not there. His family life, while complicated by politics, shows no signs of this kind of pathology. He was married to Constance of Sicily, and they had one son, the future Emperor Frederick II. Henry's entire focus was on securing his son's inheritance, not starving non-existent family rivals. So, where did the story even come from? Well, historical rumors often start with a kernel of truth that gets twisted over time, or by smashing different stories and people together. Henry's well-earned reputation for being ruthless provided the fertile ground. But the specific, tragic part of the story, a royal family destroyed from within by a creeping, internal decay, that doesn't seem to belong to him at all. It feels like a piece from a different puzzle, jammed into the wrong spot. As historians dug deeper, they realized this wasn't just a lie. It was a profound case of mistaken identity, where the actions and tragedies of two different kings, both named Henry, living in different centuries and different countries, had become hopelessly entangled. To really dismantle the myth, we have to look at the real Henry VI. Born in 1165, he was groomed for power from a young age. He wasn't some uncultured brute. He was well-educated, spoke Latin, knew the law, and was even a patron of poets. He inherited a sprawling, politically charged empire, and his life's work was all about holding it together and making it stronger. His reign was one long struggle. In Germany, he fought to keep powerful dukes in line. With the papacy, it was a constant chess match, as the popes feared his growing power in Italy. But his greatest ambition was the conquest of Sicily. His marriage to the heiress, Constance, gave him a claim, but when the Sicilian king died, the nobles chose their own guy, a man named Tancred. Henry's first invasion of Italy in 1191 was a complete disaster. His army was hit by a plague while besieging Naples, and his wife, Constance, was captured. It was a humiliating defeat, but Henry didn't give up. This is where his famous ruthlessness came back into play. The ransom he got for Richard the Lionheart refilled his treasury for a second invasion. His rival Tancred died in 1194, clearing the way. This time, Henry succeeded. He marched into the Sicilian capital of Palermo and was crowned king on Christmas Day. The very next day, his wife Constance gave birth to their son, Frederick. His rule in Sicily was harsh. When a rebellion broke out, he crushed it with what even his contemporaries called savage cruelty. Opponents were arrested, and some were brutally executed. This is the historical Henry, ambitious, intelligent, cultured, and undeniably ruthless when it came to his political goals. He was a product of his violent, high-stakes world. But there's a huge difference between being a ruthless political operator and being a monster who starves his own family. The records show a man who punished his political enemies, not one who turned on his own blood. He died of malaria in 1197 while preparing for a crusade. His story is one of imperial ambition and strife, not the bizarre, psychopathic behavior the legend suggests. We're about to solve the second half of this mystery and reveal the king at the center of the real family tragedy. But first, if you're enjoying this historical detective work, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss how this all fits together. Now, let's leave the 12th century Holy Roman Empire and jump forward nearly 300 years to 15th century England. Here, we find another king, also named Henry VI. And in his life story, we find all the missing pieces of the legend: a destroyed family, the loss of a kingdom, and the shadow of madness. King Henry VI of England was the polar opposite of his German namesake. Where the emperor was ruthless, the English king was gentle, pious, and hated conflict. He became king as an infant in 1422, inheriting the French territories his warrior father, Henry V, had won. But he was no warrior. He founded Eton College and King's College, Cambridge. He was a builder of schools, not a conqueror of nations. The tragedy of his reign began in 1453. After hearing that England had lost its final territories in the 100 Years' War, King Henry, then 31, had a complete mental breakdown. He slipped into a catatonic state, totally unresponsive. For over a year, the King of England was a living ghost. He was mute and motionless. When his wife, Margaret of Anjou, presented him with their newborn son and heir, Edward, an observer noted that Henry just glanced at the child and looked away, showing no sign of recognition. This wasn't cruelty. It was a symptom of a profound illness, likely a form of catatonic schizophrenia he may have inherited from his French grandfather, King Charles VI, famously known as Charles the Mad. While the king was lost in his own mind, his kingdom fell apart. The power vacuum led to a vicious struggle for control between the king's cousin, Richard, Duke of York, and his fiercely protective wife, Queen Margaret. This conflict ignited one of the most brutal civil wars in English history, the Wars of the Roses. This is the true story of a family starvation, not a literal one, but a starvation of power, peace, and security. The king's illness robbed him of everything: his crown, his kingdom, and ultimately, his family. His mental absence created a vortex of violence that consumed the English nobility for 30 years. His only son, Edward, was killed in battle. His formidable wife died embittered and in exile. And Henry himself was eventually deposed, imprisoned in the Tower of London, and most likely murdered. Here is the real tragedy. It wasn't an act of monstrous, intentional cruelty. It was the devastating fallout from a king's mental illness. His family was destroyed not by an order to starve them, but by the chaos and war that flourished in the absence of a capable mind on the throne. The horror wasn't in a king's command, but in his silence. And now, the two halves of the story click into place. The legend of the emperor who starved his own family is a historical chimera, a monster made by stitching together the parts of two different men. From the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, the myth takes its villain. It borrows his reputation for ruthlessness, his German background, and his nickname, the Cruel. His real political brutality made him the perfect template for a tyrant. From the English King Henry VI, the myth takes its tragedy. It borrows the devastating story of a royal family's collapse. It takes the king's name, Henry VI, and the genuine destruction that surrounded his family, the loss of his kingdom and the death of his son. This provided the heart-wrenching narrative of ruin. Over time, likely through spoken stories and simple confusion, these two separate histories merged. The cruelty of the 12th century emperor was fused with the tragic consequences of the 15th century king's illness. The result was a new, sensational, and completely false story. A cruel emperor named Henry VI who destroyed his own family. It's a classic example of how historical myths are born. History isn't always neat and tidy. It's messy, filled with people who have the same name, stories that sound alike, and propaganda that outlives its purpose. In a world without instant fact-checking, it was easy for the lines to blur. A storyteller, wanting to emphasize the emperor's cruelty, might have spiced up his tale with details from the more recent tragedy of the English king. A century later, that embellishment is repeated as fact, and soon enough, it's written down as history. The real story isn't about a simple villain. It's about two complex men. One, a hard ruler who used brutal methods to hold his empire together, and the other, a gentle man whose personal affliction plunged his country into a bloody civil war. We started with the chilling image of a monstrous emperor, a man so evil he would starve his own family for a crown. We end with the truth. That monster never existed. He is a phantom of history, a case of mistaken identity that has unfairly slandered one ruler while hiding the genuine tragedy of another. The story of Emperor Henry VI is a lesson in power and the brutal realities of his world. The story of King Henry VI of England is a heartbreaking look at how personal frailty can shape the course of a nation. This journey from myth to fact is a powerful reminder. History is filled with sensational tales repeated so often they feel true. But it's always worth asking, who told this story and why? Often, when we dig beneath the surface of a shocking legend, we find a truth that is far more complex, more human, and ultimately, more fascinating. The emperor who starved his family is a myth, but the story of how that myth was made tells us everything about the fragile nature of history itself. What do you think? Had you ever heard the legend of Henry VI? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you thought the legend of an emperor starving his own family was chilling, wait until you hear the story of a woman condemned not just to die, but to watch her children burn beside her. It's a tale of fear, fire, and the horrors that justice once called mercy. Click here to uncover the fate of the witch who was burned alive with her children. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories you thought you knew. Thanks for watching.